Cloud. We're recording. Hello and welcome to the first of what we hope will be many What Did We Just Watch episodes. This is a collaboration between Bardfest and my own stuff, Lou Harry. I'll be your host for today, and we have a panel of folks who have all watched. I hope some of you who are listening have also watched the Globe Theater streaming production of Two Noble Kinsmen. Every time I start to say that, I have to not say Two Gentlemen of Verona. I start to go in that direction and then have to pull back. We have a wonderful panel of folks who have joined us, depending on how your screen is being configured. We have Glenn Dobbs from Bardfest. Welcome.
Hey.
Doug Powers, director, actor. We have Paige Scott, writer, actress, composer. And we have Marcia, who is runs the, let me get the name right, it's Indy Playwrights Workshop, is that right? No.
It's the Indiana Playwrights Circle.
Indiana Playwrights Circle. And is also somebody who is always a lively, the discussion is always lively whenever Shakespeare comes around. Here's the idea. Whenever I go to a play, in my ideal world, and of course this is not the ideal world out there right now, my ideal world after a play is I'd love to be able to get together with people who saw the same show, get together over drinks and fries at the pub and say, okay, what did we just see? And to dissect it. We're able to do that a little more comfortably in this environment because A, we have never met the writer, we don't know the actors, we don't know the director, so we can kind of be freewheeling about this. None of us have published stacks of books on Shakespeare, although some, like Marcia, have studied them in much greater detail perhaps than we have. And maybe, let's start there, Marcia. You may be the only one, you and Glenn probably are the only ones who have seen other productions of this. Is that correct?
So I have not seen another production of this play, but I did study it in graduate school, and my PhD is in Shakespeare. So I have maybe an inch more knowledge about the time period than the average Joe. I taught Shakespeare for 16 years. And now I am not an academic anymore, but I still engage in theater. I'm obviously, running the scene nights for the Indiana Playwrights Circle, and I write plays myself. And Shakespeare is my kind of guiding light throughout all of that. So,
and for some of us on the other end of it, my rule of thumb with Shakespeare, for me, has always been never to even look at the text until I see a production. So I went into this, not having seen Two Noble Kinsmen before, I went into this one completely cold, hoping that the Globe folks will be able to tell me the story. Doug, Paige, what did you go into this with?
You want to go first?
Sure. Why not?
Yeah.
Thank you. Because one of us has to, otherwise we'll see. So yeah, I had heard of it. That is about all I knew about this text, and I'd certainly never seen a production of it. So pretty darn cold.
Paige?
I was the same way. I didn't know anything about it. And well, I saw it. So
yeah. Well, let's start with you. Let's start with you guys then. With you turn it on. Tell me the story. You're waiting for them to deliver it to you. And what were your early reactions to it as you were watching?
Well, they cut something.
Right. Well, we didn't know that.
A lot of things.
We didn't know that till later. They cut a big chunk.
They cut the whole prologue, and if you watch Globe Productions, they almost always never edit anything.
Right.
And they cut the prologue and the epilogue and the parade by Hyman coming in and blessing the wedding. And,
yeah. Oh, but by the way, don't Google the phrase "parade by Hyman." Okay. Just
You'll be sorry you did.
You'll be sorry. Yeah, so I didn't learn, I didn't find out until afterwards that there was this whole apologetic, ode to Chaucer.
Oh yeah, comes right out of this baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
So for those who watch it, they sort of throw us right into the three queens, were they?
Yes.
Begging for some assistance there.
Yeah.
That first scene had me going, what are we watching? First,
Yeah.
I had no idea that it was connected to characters in Midsummer Night's Dream either.
Oh, that's what blew my mind, because then I was like, oh, wow. Okay. Well, this guy's decision making is really consistent. Because everyone ends up in the woods somewhere.
And every 20 years he marries a Hippolyta. It's
And then it ties to, then I'm like, wait a minute.
You love the casting of Hippolyta?
We're in Oedipus now.
Well, Oedipus is actually where the whole thing comes from. That's where Creon is the little brother of
Right.
former wife of Oedipus. That's when he sits there, and when Palamon and Arcady, I'm probably mispronouncing that, but Palamon and Arcady.
Oh, we'll pronounce it 47 ways over the course of the next, hour.
P&E, man.
Isn't the kingdom all full of rot and full of terrible things and full of it's all bad, and we should just leave because we're two noble kinsmen, and we should run off and be ourselves. And then they hear Theseus is coming. Oh, well, we got to fight for him. And they
got to be battling. But they also, that was Creon's deal in Antigone, was not burying the dead. And so we start with this begging that the dead can be buried. You want to, Marsha or Glenn, you want to fill those of us who didn't know that there was a prologue, what that was all about?
I'll defer to Marsha. I just read books. She's got the PhD.
Well, to be very honest, I didn't have time to reread it.
Okay.
But I have my Shakespeare book right here, so I can look at it. But I mainly focused on the play as it was staged because I was thinking of it as like how I would write like a kind of deeper scholarly review of it, something that would be somewhat longer. And so I watched it twice. In looking at the prologue, Shakespeare does this kind of apology a lot, right? Henry V, he apologizes for not having, the horses and the whatever.
Right.
And then
Or we couldn't hire an army to perform for you.
Right. Yeah. And it's just a convention and everything, right? As far as the epilogue is concerned, first of all, let me also say that this is the second play that Shakespeare used Chaucer as a direct source. The first one would have been Troilus and Cressida. And there's some similarities between that play and this play as far as his sort of moral mood, I think. Also, let's look at this epilogue here.
Well, the epilogue's kind of another one of the, we hope you enjoyed our show. We're humbly,
Yeah.
you're them, we're us.
Very much like, any of them, the epilogue to As You Like It, or Henry IV Part 2, or any of them. They're always, give us your hands kind of thing, right? And so I think that I did not miss them at all in the Globe production. And typically, the Globe productions end with a dance. So I was expecting that. And I did not miss the epilogue or the prologue. I knew what the story was, and I knew it was based on Chaucer's Knight's Tale. But I think in some ways taking those things out doesn't really do any damage to the story, and gets us right in without any confusion. So it's actually not a terrible move in my opinion.
I
And
wasn't.
that's not to be confused with Heath Ledger's Knight's Tale.
Oh, it's not even.
No.
Oh,
Out of-
I was just about to ask.
No.
It's not even remotely.
That's a Knight's Tale I care about.
There you go. No, the thing I wanted to point out was I totally agree. I didn't miss it in terms of production value at all, in terms of the epilogue not being there. I think it's Cymbeline is another play where the gods come down. Are supposed to, Zeus is supposed to come down and say, hey, I'm going to write this wrong or whatever. And that's usually cut as well. The reason I'm surprised is I've seen a bunch of Globe productions and they never cut anything. And so the fact that they even cut it was a little bit of a surprise to me.
Right.
In the same year in 2018, I was there and saw their Hamlet, and they kept the play within the play, which is weird. I mean, like they kept the conceit, but they just didn't do it. They didn't put it on stage at all. I think it could be that Michelle Terry is the new Globe director, and that just might be her style,
Right.
So I don't know. And I think that might have been either her first year or second year. I'm not 100% sure. But every artistic director is going to do it a little differently.
Yeah.
And I really liked this, and I did not like their Hamlet very much.
Well, one of the things that I'm always interested in when I'm watching a Globe production is who my favorite audience member is. I don't know if you guys picked out a favorite. Mine was the guy in the Raiders hat and the Hard Rock shirt. It was very cool at one point. And then the person, he was sort of stage right. And then there was the person in the front row with the red watch band who kept sort of having the hand in the corner of the shot.
On the lawn, yeah. The people who touch the stage just because.
Always fun. Doug, give me an idea of, let's go big picture. Did you enjoy this play?
I did, oddly enough. Hang on, my phone is choosing this moment to ring. Yeah, no, I did. It was not what I was expecting.
Okay, let's go back to that. What were you expecting?
Well, I was expecting a pretty standard, Shakespearean story. This one has some departures from the convention. Not to get ahead of ourselves, but it did not end the way I thought it was going to.
Yeah, usually it's
starters.
either a funeral, a bunch of funerals, or a wedding. You get both.
Exactly. Oh, a spoiler, yeah. But and I did also watch the preliminary video from the.
Dr. Tosh.
Pardon?
Dr. Tosh, the guy who does.
Yeah. So based on that, I was expecting this production to lean much more heavily into the queer subtext, which was all over it.
Yeah.
Or sometimes not very sub, which they did not. In my judgment, they
But it's
pretty
interesting.
far away from that.
It's interesting you say that, Doug, because the Royal Shakespeare Company production of it went heavy into it.
Yeah.
It just went huge into it, and it tried to make a big statement. And you read a couple of other writers about the thing, and they talk about a device that's used in the show of the dramatic 180-degree shift in 2 seconds. Here we have Amelia doing one of Shakespeare's better speeches about Flavinia, was it? I think it's Flavinia.
Flavinia, yes, gorgeous.
Gorgeous speech. And then it's like 2 pages later, she's holding both of these men. Oh, that one's nice. Well, that one's pretty too, type of thing. It's like a 180-degree switch really quickly. It's the same thing with Paragon and Palamon and Arcite. We love each other together. A woman walks by. It's an instant dramatic switch, between the two. Theseus says, I will not tolerate this. His wife says, oh, please. Okay. It's an instant switch, between the two. So sometimes I wonder, although it's full of homoerotic energy, with it, sometimes I wonder if we're watching it as a 2021 audience or a 2020 audience. Is it 20? Yeah, it's been a long pandemic. 2020. I sometimes wonder if we're trying to superimpose stuff on it, or if that's what it was. With it, because of the way it's written, it's got a sudden shifts in it that by the end of the play, you don't get the feeling like Amelia is upset about her choice. You know, she seems happy with her final choice, even though in a modern context, it's a horrible choice.
Right.
Right.
Well,
Well,
you know,
yeah.
I think too in the time period, you know, single sex friendships were considered to be like the highest kind of friendship you could have. And I'm sorry.
Romantic relation. I'm sorry.
It doesn't have to be romantic. It
Right.
can just be you know, male friendship like Theseus and his friend, or you know, Amelia and her friend Flavina. She also makes a point of saying that they were innocent, you know, so implying that they did not have like the sort of cloud of sexual romance over their relationship because they were just so innocent. Which is probably one of the reasons why they didn't go into it. But, you know, Archite and Palamon say, you know, that while they're in prison, they're, you know, they're going to be each other's wives, you know. So, I mean, it definitely could have gone that direction. But you're right about how this play just turns on a dime, you know. Oh, I love you like you're my best friend and you're going to be my wife in prison. And now all of a sudden I see this girl and, you know, now I'm like, boom, you know, now you're my enemy because you saw her too and you're in love with her too. So there's also like lots and lots of structural mirroring in this play. And I think that that's one of the things that I really like about it is how much, you know, for instance, the jailer's daughter and her love at first sight for Palamon mirrors Palamon's love at first sight for Amelia and how that's really, really frustrated all throughout the play until the very end. And, you know, we have a case where Archite is the winner of Amelia, but then he loses because he dies. You know, the horse fall on top of him, you know. And then, you know, the jailer's daughter gets Palamon, but she doesn't really get Palamon. So, I mean, the winner is the loser is the winner. It's kind of, you know.
Well, I mean, what you said prior, because I'm like listening to all different points. Amelia didn't really have a choice.
Oh, no.
No, like, because Theseus was just like, you choose. And she's just like, I can't. They're both excellent. Which is a really wise answer to a question you don't want to answer. So whichever one put that line in is amazing. But like we're talking about Amelia like she had choices. Like she didn't. She was gonna have to marry whoever poor bum killed the other guy in a you know.
She could have said no, it just would have meant that both of them died.
Right.
Oh,
it's kind of like
she didn't have that option. She didn't.
Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah, she chose like I can't, you know.
So poop sandwich versus double poop sandwich with cheese.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Well, still, but what
hey, did you guys love the way it was staged? The fight was like Archite.
I actually didn't love that, but
no, I didn't love it at all.
Baffled me, and I think that pops up a lot in Shakespeare. The sort of we're at a big climactic action or emotional moment. Let's just have somebody come on stage and describe it.
Yeah.
I was just watching Cheek by Jowl's Winter's Tale and reminded of the whole, you know, reunion. Part of the big reunion scene at the end between the former friends is all just described, and a director has to choose. Okay, we'll mime it over here. Having that. I was waiting for that big battle to happen on stage or something.
I know. Yeah, me too.
They did. They almost went with it with the spear fight, but not for the last epic battle. I don't.
Yeah, but even going back for a second to you talked about the homoerotic quality of it. The straight up erotic quality of it is pretty blatant.
Oh yes.
I don't know if I know there's always sort of Shakespearean puns and always an actor, you know, hip bumping or something to send a message to the audience to underline the joke. But this one just puts it all right out there.
Yeah, the doctor for the jailer's daughter and the jailer's daughter herself, you know, what you do there, wench? Well, play at stool ball. What else is there to do?
If I could jump in for a second, one of my favorite reference books, Shakespeare in Performance, describes a slightly more elaborate sequence involving the jailer's daughter. The climax of the May fertility dance scene had Imogen Stubbs jump on top of a gigantic leather phallus carried by all the Morris dancers. She was harnessed with a bridle, reins, and blinkers, thus representing a hobby horse. The dance culminated with
There's
her
that reference again.
phallus collapsing after a mimed ejaculation of white silk directed at the female members of the royal hunting party. Well, the globe didn't go that
Subtle. I like it. It's subtle.
You guys remember the monster that's in the march dance that has the tail? I forgot the name.
The bavian, the baboon.
Yeah, she has a schlong the size of a, it goes on forever, and it's amazing. And in the picture that I saw, it was just huge. And
Well, that might be the one that I checked in my New Oxford Shakespeare. There's the cast of characters in this play, and one is described as a group. It says 6 countrymen, one dressed as a baboon.
Yeah. Yep.
Go William John.
Casting of the little person as the jailer's daughter, I thought that was amazing.
She was my freaking hero.
Yeah,
Like,
she
I
really
was
stole the show.
rooting for her the whole time. I was like, yeah, and that's when honestly, that's when I thought like, oh, lovers in the woods. There's something very like Helena about her. Like, yes, she's going out in the woods to help this dude who doesn't give a crap about her. This is awesome. I have somebody to root for now. And the fact that she ended up getting tricked.
Right.
And didn't end up really getting what she wanted that really made me sad.
Do we ever see her with the main characters at all?
No.
Or is it
Oh, she
completely
passes
separate?
by them. She passes by them.
Well, the differences in men, that great line.
Uh-huh. Oh, to look at them is like a holiday.
Yeah,
I think that was the line. Yeah. That was a fantastic line.
We are talking about Francesca Mills, by the way, who has also appeared in multiple productions. I sent her a message, haven't heard back from her yet, saying we were going to be talking. Among her credits, she was a droid puppeteer in The Force Awakens.
Yes, she was. All right. Good for her.
I love it.
I found her delivery a
wanna be your
little
friend.
hard to follow on occasion, but I thought she was just delightful and charming. Overall.
I thought in the beginning her delivery was a little rough, but as it went along, it got better and better. I think somebody said in the chat she has some serious Ophelia, and absolutely. There's so much. There's so many touchstones of other Shakespeare plays in this. This could be an alternative ending to Midsummer Night's Dream. The Ophelia connection between the jailer's daughter, almost drowning, but that she is saved, as Ophelia is not. When Amelia is looking at the 2 different pictures of the 2 different men, is very reminiscent of Gertrude and Hamlet in the closet scene. Look at this picture of this guy, look at this picture of this guy, and and I mean, I could go on and on and on. The pastoral scenes and the woods and everything has resonance with Two Gentlemen of Verona, as well as You Like It, and so on and so on and so on. I mean, the wrestling goes back to As You Like It. I feel like the older that Shakespeare got, the more like clip shows his late plays became. Cymbeline is like a clip show of like King Lear, Rape of Lucrece, and a couple of other things. And I feel like Two Noble. I'm like, which one is it? Two Noble Kinsmen has some of that, same kind of recycled style to it, but I still really like it. So I don't know.
Guys, from a casting point of view, when you're casting a little person, there is a real fine line between mocking the little person I'm talking about and the little person as a real character.
Right.
I thought they threaded that needle really, really well.
I think she was the most emotionally honest
Yeah,
And
I thought she was.
in the show.
yeah, I thought, yeah, she was, like I said before, she was the only one that I was really rooting for.
Right. It's a little tough with the guys. I mean, I didn't quite buy them as, such great soldiers that they were supposed to be. It felt a little more like, extras on 90210.
I mean, the funny thing about the guys is that they just don't have much character development. They're just kind of hollow shells.
Fun. I mean, it's
They're
fun.
lovers. Like their arc never really started to develop until they saw a woman, and that was their main focus. They had no other focus besides, like, I'm going to try to possess this thing.
Yeah. And it was interesting when I first encountered them and trying to figure out where their plot was going. I felt a little Rosencrantz and Guildenstern-y, not in attitude, but just in, are they on the periphery of the story, or are they going to at some point take some control of their story? Because again, you mentioned they're talking about, oh, we got to get out of here. Oh, wait, there's a war. Okay, we'll fight for our country. Okay, now we're captured, and we're going to make the best of it here. And
but that device though is used all through. Shakespeare does that all the time. Even in Romeo and Juliet, he's there for Romeo's there for a different girl, sees Juliet and goes, oh, she's now the one.
Right.
So that kind of device happens all the time. The interesting thing though is, and I'm going to defer to my PhD colleague here. Shakespeare wrote Act 1. He wrote the beginning of Act 3.
Yeah.
He wrote the Flavinia speech. And
that explains a lot.
he wrote the very end, that wonderful little thing Theseus says.
right.
Yeah.
So most of the
Did he write the three
witches?
the pleading to the gods, where each takes their turn to?
He wrote the
That
first.
didn't feel like him.
Well, no, he wrote the first.
No, that didn't.
He wrote the first one when they first appear,
Right.
but he didn't write the second one.
Okay.
He's talking about the prayers before the fight.
No,
And that felt very not
That's
him
all
to me.
Fletcher.
Yeah.
That was Fletcher, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't really worry as much about who wrote what. I'm trying to think of the play as a whole, just because I want to know if it works as a whole.
Right.
I mean, supposedly Shakespeare didn't write the double toil and trouble part of Macbeth. Middleton probably wrote that, but does it work as a play? I guess that I've just never been that interested in the authorship question. I believe in Shakespeare.
Right.
I believe that Shakespeare, like me, is a collaborative person in creative pursuits, and I'm just not super worried about it.
So it doesn't bother you that Neil Simon wrote a couple of the jokes that they plugged in? Just kind of, they brought him in New Haven to kind of punch it up.
Bruce Valanche.
I don't think I noticed. I wasn't really paying attention. I didn't have the text on my lap or anything while I was watching it, so I have no idea. And as I said, I didn't have time to reread the play. But what I will say about Shakespeare and Fletcher's collaboration is that it feels like toward the end of his career, that Shakespeare is not quite as in mode as maybe Fletcher is, and Fletcher also had a really rich collaborative life with Francis Beaumont, who wrote The Night of the Burning Pestle, but he's mostly famous for his collaborations with Fletcher. And the thing is that, Shakespeare stops writing quite as much towards the end of his career anyway. Part of the reason why is because of the plague that starts in, 1606, I think, and goes on and off for 3 years. So unlike today, they would tour around the countryside into rural areas that would not have as many people to gather during their plague times, and we just get together on the internet. But anyway, it's in around 1613 that this play was produced, but it was not published in any of the folios. It was published in quarto, I think I've got this in notes somewhere.
I'm sorry, we don't need exact dates. We're
Like the
in the bar right now.
1640s or something, maybe. I can't remember exactly. But, you know, the globe burned down in 1613 during a performance of Henry VIII. So that kind of, to me, might have been the straw that broke the camel's back and what set him back to Stratford. But I don't have anything to back that up.
Well, we're talking. We're more interested in what we saw. You know what I mean?
Right.
I agree with you that at least in this context, it's less about dissecting, you know, whose line was who, and
Right.
what was the experience like for somebody watching that play, and how much. I'm always, you know, I've gotten into arguments with people about, oh, if you read this, if you read this, if you read this, but I don't think you should have to in order to. I mean, yes, it might give you a richer experience, might teach you more, but.
Right.
Somebody who does not know Hamlet should be able to go and experience Hamlet.
Yeah.
Right. It's like watching Young Frankenstein without having seen the
Right.
James. You still enjoy it, but if you've seen the James Whale movies, it's much better.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And
To go back-
Go ahead, Doug.
Okay, go ahead, Doug.
Well, I was just to go back to the three prayers for a minute.
Yeah.
The only reason it didn't feel like him. I'm with you, Mark. I don't care who wrote what, but it just was. It struck me as it was happening. Like, wow, that's a really overt, in a way that didn't feel very familiar with the rest of the canon. In terms of, like, you know, here are these Greek gods, and we are praying to them, and each of them gives a sign of their approval, and that's what seemed like, you know. It always felt like in most of the other references to the Greek pamphlet that there's this sort of line of deference between, you know, yes, of course we're Christian, but we're just, you know, we're talking about these gods as sort of literary characters. But this was a full-on prayer that is answered. That was what felt strange about it.
We're giving credit for being answered.
Yeah, well, but they are. Look at everything that those three prayed for, they got.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Archite prayed for victory in the fight. He got it.
Right.
Palamon prayed for love. He got it. And Amelia prayed not to have to make the choice for herself.
Right.
She got.
Right.
That's what was fascinating about that segment to me. The other, like, oh, wait a minute. They got exactly what they prayed for.
There's a couple other things. You notice that unlike every other Shakespeare play, it's full of stage directions. You know, it's full of stage directions when you read it. You know, it says come in, they fight. It's got all kinds of different stage directions in it that other Shakespeare plays do not have. And the final thing is going back to, I agree with you, just enjoying the play and not worrying so much about who wrote it, but it was his last play and he was 47 years old, and you're trying to find clues of why, when you're 47 years of age, that you've written so much, why you would suddenly stop. And nobody seems to know why he would. We assume because of the globe burning down and maybe he lost money or something along that line, but yet he came back to collaborate for this. And so it's, you know, you try to parse, especially that last phrase Theseus says, you try to parse what he was thinking about at the time, and you try to you know, go beyond just the simple plot of the play and try to see who the man was.
But for those who are watching the play, for Paige and I and Doug, who had never experienced the play before, one of the challenges, and somebody pointed this out in the chat too, is there's nobody really to root for. I mean, the jailer's daughter, to a certain extent, you want her to be happy. But even in some of the lighter Shakespeare plays, you're rooting for somebody in most cases. Maybe I'm wrong there, but
it's only a 2-hour play too. It moves along pretty well.
Well, is it only a 2-hour play, or was that a 2-hour production?
Well,
it was a 2-hour production. They made quite a few cuts.
I thought they just mainly cut the epilogue.
No. There were more cuts than that.
Oh, well, I liked it. I thought
Not a huge amount, but
right.
Yeah, I want to do it at Bardfest. I think it'd be a fun show.
Okay, so let's go to your directing hats. Doug and Paige, if you were tasked with directing this, where would you start?
finding somebody who can do a Morris dance.
Right. Yeah.
I think it would, where I would start would probably be, because if I'm looking at like directing like a classic, I try to find the through theme of like why does this story need to be retold now? And with this material, I'm not sure I would be the director to be tasked with it, because my imagination is kind of limited to so two dudes wanting to possess a woman and she not really having any real choice in
No
the
agency.
matter of no agency of really controlling the situation for reasons of two dudes happen to be infatuated with her for reasons that she doesn't understand. Like I don't think that story, I can't find a way to tell that story now.
I'll recast the question for you then, and then I'll jump back to Doug. If you were instead hired to be the musical director, writer, arranger for it, what kind of music do you think?
Go ahead.
Oh God. It would also depend on the world of which director they would be. Like with this production, they had a mixture between New Orleans jazz,
right?
like the funeral,
New Orleans funeral
which
sound.
was really really bizarre. But it would all depend on the world that the director wanted to set it in, whether what kind of music it would be. I mean, I have a secret love for like late 80s, 90s like synth pop. So if I could figure a way to make it into like put it in that world,
just those brightly colored, brightly colored tank tops they were wearing would work.
Yeah,
even with the pants, it's perfect. Just
set
wouldn't
it
put the jackets on.
Oh my God, set it in a mall in 1992. Let's do it. Doug, you in? Let's do this.
Doug, what would as a director, where would your starting point be, or what would your initial questions be?
Well, I think one of the things I found most compelling about it was not either Palamon or Archite, actually. Given that it is, in this case, a 17th century play, I thought the women were badasses. Like, as much as they could be within that kind. I mean, Hippolyta?
Right.
Yeah, no, she
Beautifully cast.
she's like, look, you think we're gonna cry because our men are going off to war? Trust me, we've seen worse. If you're waiting for that, you're gonna wait forever. Like, I mean, she's just like, nope. So I really love the women in this play. I think
it's funny.
I had to do the same thing with both Merchant and Hamlet. Like, you take the female characters, who in the case of Hamlet are particularly poorly written, and you have to try to find a way to give them as much agency and as much depth as you can without changing the text. And I think there's a lot to play with Amelia. I think there are all kinds of layers to her to find. And one of the things that the professor, you remember his name, Glenn, in the preliminary video talked about was that you have this opening scene of a Shakespeare play, and there are 6 characters with lines, and only one of them is male, which is pretty cool.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, which is why I think it's a great play, because if I was directing the play, I don't think I'd be as concerned about trying to find, trying to fit it into the 21st century. I just think it's a fun play, and I think I would just treat it as it is. And the thing that's exciting about it is how many times have all of us cast Shakespeare shows, and you go into it and there's no parts for women. There's like 38 parts for men and 1 woman, and this has lots of parts for women. And I think there's a lot of interesting parts to play, and I think we would get a good cast. At least that's my view.
What are other stumbling blocks that you see within it?
the dance, because that dance is fantastic, and you need to get a good choreographer to come in and actually put that together, because that's
And good.
Yeah.
And rehearse it a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dancers.
That dance is not an easy dance. Yeah. I love the little the guy that was the head of it, the little Liberace guy, that threw his
Yes.
coat back and kind of would,
The
it
Green
was,
Man. Yeah. The schoolmaster.
Oh,
Yeah.
he was fantastic. I really enjoyed, and I also enjoyed because I'm sorry, I see everything through the lens of Bardfest, but it was a very Bardfestian show. Is that there was lots of double casting. It wasn't a huge cast, with it. You could easily put on a show like that in a more intimate space and still get the same effect. You don't need a lot of special effects. It's just a fun story. I thought the wagon as a jail was an interesting device, because you just roll them out, with it. I'm in jail. Then you say, oh, now you're not in jail. Then you roll them back.
Oh yeah, and the chain bit where they were just like leaning into each other, barking into each other's faces. That was good.
Yeah. That was cool. That was nice.
That was some fun. That was fun.
What do you, if you, Globe's productions by their nature are relatively minimalist for the most part. I mean, there's not a whole, obviously the structure doesn't allow for major scene changes and everything else. Sometimes in seeing more elaborate productions, for me, the balance gets thrown off. We lose the focus on character sometimes. Do you experience that when I want to go a little bit to we're in this unique place right now where instead of getting, an occasional Shakespeare production locally that we can see, or a festival in a tight space, right now we can watch the Globe. I mean, I could spend tonight watching a Globe production, a Stratford production, and a National Theater production, and a Cheek by Jowl production. And all of this stuff is available to us now. Obviously, there's big benefits to that. Do you think it changes people's expectations of what they're going to see in a local production? Glenn? Or Paige, go. Go ahead, Paige.
Honestly, and like I've talked to other artistic leaders about this with particularly on what we're seeing, the fact that theater has become, like live theater has become more accessible on a digital level than it was prior, because especially with things like with things like the National Theater, like the Frankenstein feeds and and Twelfth Night. Like normally people would have to go to a Fathom event or actually go to the theater to see that stuff. So like it's becoming more necessary to make it more accessible, but also I hope that audiences stepping back from whatever world we're living in right now, they got to understand that the theaters, once we get back into business will not be the same. Minimalist theater will reign king for a while. So if people are expecting big budgets, and especially writers have to think about that too. We're like, you want it to be producible. Like,
you see, watching the National Theater is a mistake. I've had the privilege of going a couple of times when I was overseas. Its reputation is in scene design. That's its whole thing. And so you can't compare any theater, even Broadway, to what they do in the National Theater, because that's their thing, with it. So you're going to go and see Grapes of Wrath, but man, it's going to be a complete dust field in front of you. They will build it. It's an amazing thing to go see. It's a privilege to go see, but it's not a fair comparison to regular theater by any stretch with it. So I enjoy seeing it, but all of us would agree that Shakespeare's strength is in its language, and so we want to go watch a show where the language is spoken well, where it's presented well, and if it's done well and compelling enough then we don't need a rotating set. We don't need.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I hated Shakespeare when I was in high school, and the thing that turned me around about Shakespeare was in college. I saw a production of Othello, and it had no set, and everybody was in black t-shirts and black jeans, and it was just mesmerizing. So, I mean, I think it's so much more important to put all of your eggs into the language and acting basket and less so into costumes and set. It just doesn't matter.
Yeah. People invest in relationships a lot more than anything, because that's why they go, is to see human
Yeah,
connection.
yeah. I mean, I directed Merchant with no set and 3 pieces of furniture, and Hamlet with booked flats, and that was it, and some furniture. But what I think there might be an issue with people getting these expectations set from watching lay people, not people who are accustomed to the theater, but might find these streaming things because there's not much else to do right now. And so they might get this set of expectations in their head. But I think once you get them in the door, and if you've got the acting and the characters and the story firing on all cylinders, which Shakespeare makes it easy to do because it's just gorgeous stories and language. But what the live theater really gets you is that intimate emotional experience. And I think once you get people back in the door and they get that again, they're going to forget all the theater they watch, because that's what I miss watching a lot of the video theater. Is it's not that intimate. I'm looking at something that's shot really close, that was delivered on stage for a really big house to get back to the back rows, and it ended up looking, to me, to my taste, a little overdone a lot of times. I know not they're playing to the house they're in, but we're seeing it on camera really close, and so I lose that emotional intimacy a lot of times watching these video performances. But the same performance in a live theater would be captivating.
I've been in discussions with people on the other side of it who are, comparing it not to live theater, but to films. And I think that the degree of sophistication how some of these are shot is remarkable. And I would much rather see a production shot from the stage with actors who have been performing it for 6 months or 3 months, with that level of detail and with that almost, it's edited, but that sort of not editing, that the performer is giving a performance in sequence.
Yeah.
I think there's a richness to that I would rather see than a lot of the let's make it in Hollywood. A comparison, I was watching the London production of Into the Woods on video, the outdoor, in the park thing.
The open air?
Yeah, I would much rather see that than the Disney film version of Into the Woods, which was competent and okay.
The open air was more clever too.
The open air but it was also more emotionally resonant. It hit those chords in a different way, and I think the same thing is happening with some of the productions I've seen, some of the Stratford Shakespeare productions, some of the Globe productions, to me are stronger than shot from the stage than film versions of the same material.
I think that's generally true. I think, one of the things, Doug and I have been in conversation earlier today, Bardfest is going to be starting a YouTube channel. We have probably 9 or 10 of our productions that we've done that were, filmed like by Zach Rosing. They're quality films. And I put one up today. I'm starting to build the thing. And it was a good show. But, on film, it doesn't quite carry the same punch, it does. Paige, one of the ones we have is Coriolanus. I saw Coriolanus like 4 times during that time you were there. I saw your performance. There was a 3-dimensional, intimate quality to it that the film doesn't capture. It tells a story.
It's a problem. You're not able to move the eye like you are in the theater, or that you can with a 3, 4, 5 camera setup.
It's nice to have the video in terms of the record, type of thing. And
an archive, yeah.
An archive, and that's really what I'm thinking of it as. But no, Bardfest's brand has always been intimate theater, partly because we're in a closet. Partly because that's what we do. We don't do the Indianapolis Shakespeare in the Park where there's 20,000 people and the stage is on a sound stage that you have the Avett brothers on. You know, we want Hamlet to be right in front of you. You know, there's no place
He was.
for anywhere to go, and thereby you get a much more powerful, resonating performance when you see something like that. You know, Taming of the Shrew, when we did that a few years ago, you know, it had a band and singing and stuff that people were right in front of you. It was cute. It was fun. People were surprised and they were animated and they were engaged by it. And that's the kind of product we want to make, you know. And so I think circling back to Two Noble Kinsmen, it's a goofy enough show that I think, because it is goofy. It's like, I will love you. You're my kinsman. I love you. Did you see her? You know, that's funny, you know, and that kind of stuff is, you know, there was a scene where Theseus, I forgot his friend's name.
Spiritus.
And he goes, wow, you know, we're together. We're the thing. And Hippolyta has to go, hey, come here. You're getting a little too excited over there. Come on. You know, she gives him a look. And those kind of side looks at the audience where they break the fourth wall and stuff like that, that's priceless.
Right. And that's a matter of a director deciding on what the overall tone is going to be for the show, which I would imagine it can be a little more challenging in a show like this where there is life and death. There is war. There's a lot going on beside the comedy, which is fair. Obviously, there's a lot of in the comedies. There's a lot of how do we deal with forgiveness and how do we deal with you know, maturing.
I think too, like one of the things is you know, fighting against fate. You know, like when Paige was saying, you know, Amelia doesn't have any agency, and really the jailer's daughter in a way doesn't either because she's tricked into loving this other guy. You know, I think that all of the characters are fighting against fate. I mean, that's kind of what Theseus is talking about at the end, you know. So this play has a really serious subtext to it, even though it's funny in lots of parts.
Mm-hmm. So there's stuff to play with there.
The interchanging between farce and tragedy was really kind of throwing me off, but I think that was probably where the place that I'm also, like, now that I'm in this conversation, like trying to meditate on what mood was I in when I pressed play, because that also probably painted my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're talking about the fact that the women didn't have agency is a universal theme that we see throughout Shakespeare. There's very few plays Shakespeare ever wrote that women had any agency at all. But he did.
I'll make the case for my favorite of the comedies. It's Love's Labor's Lost, where the women control it.
Yeah. Yep. That's the one time.
Well,
they named their own terms.
Mm-hmm. An argument for Beatrice, I suppose, too. But
Portia,
Cleopatra.
Yeah.
I said basically
3. You have 3, Glenn.
There goes your point.
That's the thing.
Only 3.
The all agency season.
Let's go to Doug.
I'm down.
We did Merchant. You know, one of the things that makes the Merchant of Venice so compelling is that when Shylock goes, you know, if you cut us, do we not bleed? Are we not the same as you? You know, type of thing. And considering Christopher Marlowe's Jew of Malta that was running at the same time, which was so heavily anti-Semitic, Shakespeare broke the mode by doing that. And the examples of women you just gave is another testimony to Shakespeare's far-ranging thinking, because, you know, for the most part, people just weren't doing that, you know, type of thing in other plays. And that Shakespeare was far enough thinking to give Cleopatra and Portia and other women like that. Please.
But they were also being played by men.
It's true.
We were not allowed to be playing most roles for years. So yes, yay Shakespeare. However,
I only just found this out while like looking at stuff for this play and this conversation. But I just found out that women were allowed to perform in the 17th century under James, but only in masks in court. So they were not allowed to perform in like the Globe. But that was totally new information to me, and I've been studying this stuff for a long time. But I focus more on the history plays, so maybe that's why I didn't know that. So anyway, yeah, it's kind of interesting that women were allowed to perform indoors in court, but not like at the Globe,
We're gonna wrap things up at the hour, but I wanted to ask each of you a question. To respond to a line that was actually cut from this production, but I believe it's in the epilogue. I'm quoting, "I would now ask ye how ye liked the play." Doug?
Oh, yeah. Overall, I liked it. I would like to see other explorations of this text, and I read it briefly. I didn't delve. I'd like to. I think there's stuff to play with there. Well,
Marcia?
Oh, me? I really, really love this production of it. I thought that it had great acting, and I thought that there was a lot of emotional depth to Amelia and the jailer's daughter. And I love the dancing. I love the music. I thought it was all really interesting. And, a lot of the Globe shows that I've seen have been experimental in a kind of negative sense. Like, it didn't feel satisfying to me for some of the plays. So I was satisfied by this. And I really was happy to see it. And I think that, like, it made me put back on my scholar's hat and want to think about like what the deeper themes were. And I think that they did a pretty good job of putting them out there. So I liked it quite a bit.
Paige?
I'm on the fence between a yes and the no. If I'm going, it was clearly like a second draft of Two Gents of Verona. It kind of had the same flair. So if you're going to if there's a cage fight match between Two Gents and this, I'm going to go with the Two Noble Kinsmen, just because I didn't I did not like Two Gents of Verona. So yeah, I guess I liked it and compared to other things.
Sorry.
Glenn?
Well, before I answer your question, Marcia, I want to ask you, do you want to direct Two Noble Kinsmen for Bardfest?
Oh, do I? Maybe. I've never directed before. I'm just a humble writer.
We're going to talk. We'll do lunch. No, I liked it. I surprisingly liked it. My first exposure to this play was during a production of Shakespeare Abridged. It has a gag in it where he says, "Well, what about that Russian play?" "What Russian play?" "Two Noble Kinsmen."
Right.
It's not called Two Noble.
Yes.
It's a very funny bit in the play.
Tons.
But
Love
you
them.
know what Chernobyl is before the miniseries came. So I liked it, and I'm just going to be public here and say we are going to do it for a future Bardfest. I don't know when. That's if the plague ends and we can do Bardfest. Yeah.
Great.
This is a great idea, Lou. They're doing this. Great idea.
Well, always had a blast. Oh, you're a good group of people to hang out at the pub with and talk about after a show. Let's do more of these.
Let's do it for real as soon as we can.
If you are chiming in on this later, check in with Bardfest and learn more about what Bardfest is doing. You can follow them on all social media. I've been keeping a running list of streaming theater options at louharry.com. Visit there and you'll have plenty of choices while you're in hibernation. Thank you very much for engaging with us. Thank you to our panel, and be safe, be smart. We hope to see you all again really soon.
Bye, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.